Hello, everyone. I'm David Morris, publisher for Lake Drive Books, and I'm joined today here with author Marla Taviano. I almost said Marla Thomas. I don't know what the deal is with that. It's the Marla and the Marlo Thomas. So
Marlo, yeah,
that
that's
goes
not
back a
me.
ways. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you, David.
Well, it's great to be joined by you and to talk about the publishing that you do, the writing that you've done, the books that you have coming,
Yeah.
and to talk specifically about your new book, Jaded. Um, so before we get into that, though, specifically, just why don't you just I'd love for people to just know a little bit more about you. But before you do that, I'm gonna introduce you, Marla. I'm gonna say Marla Taviano is into books, love, justice, globes, anti-racism, blue, gray, rainbows. Rainbows aren't blue and gray. Poems.
No.
She reads and writes for a living. She's got the White Girl Learning Instagram account, which I encourage people to definitely check out. That's an amazing story in and of itself. She's a mom to some freaking awesome kids. I'm reading your own bio, so I'm saving you some work here, Marla. Wears her heart on her
Thank
t-shirts.
you.
You should see her t-shirts, everybody. And is on a mission quest journey to live whole-farted, not a typo or a misspoke on my part. We can explain that later, perhaps. She's the author of Unbelief, Poems on the Journey to
No.
Becoming a Heretic. Marla has 4 children and lives in South Carolina. And find out more at marlataviano.com. Did I get that right about your kids?
You did.
Okay.
I think
Woo.
you're cutting in and out a little bit. Hopefully the video's not doing that. Hopefully it's just me. But yeah. Yeah, that's me. I am a reader and a writer and a learner and a mom, a single mom as of 2 years ago. And I live in Columbia, South Carolina, where I've lived for the last 2.5 years, moved here from Cambodia at the beginning of a pandemic, and don't know a lot about where I live because I work from home and we were quarantined for a good bit. And I'm originally from Ohio. So
Oh, that's
I am
interesting that you moved there just before the pandemic. And
March 2020, last plane out of Cambodia. I have probably said that phrase
wow,
60 times in the last couple of years. But we literally, I took a photo of the flight board, canceled, except for ours. So, and we left our daughter and her Cambodian fiance in Cambodia because their visa interview got canceled because the embassy was closed. So that was a traumatic time for us. And then 3 months later, after 3 months of insomnia and anxiety about my kids being over there in the middle of, we didn't know what was happening. And then in September of that year, so a few months later, my husband left unexpectedly after 20 plus years of marriage. So we had we had a lot of stuff happening all at one time, as did everyone. We all have our stories, but
yeah,
it was kind of like a perfect storm of lots of not so fun life events.
Yeah.
But we're getting back on our feet.
So what do you do, Marla? What is your day job?
What do I do?
Yeah.
I am actually a writer as my day job, which sounds
Yes.
great because it sounds like I am an author who can support myself with my published works. And that is not true. I write for other people for a living, but I do love that because, I mean, for all the reasons that I just stated, moving back to a new state and all those things happening to me after 5 years of being a quote unquote missionary in a foreign land. I have a degree in elementary education, and I lasted as a teacher for less than 3 years and stayed home with my kids, started writing. I got some freelance curriculum jobs. And over those 20 years, I have just did speaking for a while with some of my other books, but did a lot of writing, a lot of editing. And now I write blog posts, social media for a loan officer, for digital marketing companies, for healthcare companies, whatever comes my way. I ghostwrite books for people.
Yeah.
So that is how I support myself and my kids. And then
That's
what
fascinating.
what I really want to do is write books. But I've been around for a while, and I understand that that takes a minute before
Yeah.
you can replace all your other income with book income. But that's the
Yes.
dream.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think that's fascinating. Actually, we're all kind of in this world where we're sort of remaking ourselves too, depending on who
Yeah,
we are in our context. But there
yeah.
seems to be more of that going on. We also have some shared, like, or some common history, I should say, not necessarily shared, but just we've been in some of the same, Christian religious publishing worlds in the
Yeah.
past. And we didn't know each other until recently, but we definitely know some mutual acquaintances. We know the business, but and so you have experience publishing books. You've got a number under your belt, but those aren't necessarily the books that you're writing anymore.
They are not. They are the opposite of the books that I'm writing. I actually have them here if people would like to see them in all their glory. In 2006, this book came out, From Blushing Bride to Wedded Wife. Practical advice from a girlfriend, what marriage is really like. I had been married about 6 years, so of course I knew all there was to know about marriage. Is that all he thinks about, how to enjoy great sex with your husband? My husband went on to have a long affair that I didn't know about, and then he
Mm,
left. So there's
mm,
that. Changing your world one diaper at a time, a reflective journey through your baby's first year. And I always said that I was never going to write parenting books beyond the, because it gets really hard after that. And I haven't to this point. My kids do come into my writing, but I don't write solely about them. And then expecting, praying for your child's development, body and soul. This is a devotional for pregnant women. The first three went out of print. This one is still in print. People are still buying this, and I guess filling it out. And it's been, I bought these copies used from places. So this is, someone wrote a big long thing to someone in here, and they
that's
gave it
amazing.
to Goodwill, I guess. So that was back in the day when I was a very good conservative evangelical Christian girl slash woman, and had a lot of thoughts, most of which I got from my parents and all the books that I read. And since the books that I read stayed very much in the category of good
Mm,
Christian books,
mm-hmm.
that's what I knew, that's what I read, what I wrote. And I would say that I regurgitated a lot of what I read into a book, and the books are good. Like, I will stand by, oh, she's a good writer, she's
The writing
funny.
part.
I still feel that way. What I was writing, oh, good heavens, makes me cringe, makes me want to throw up in my mouth a little bit. But
But it was well
I,
researched, well thought out, well articulated,
yes,
good logic.
and what I am realizing just very, very recently is, so my newest book is also pulled from books, but instead of just believing everything, reading a very narrow set of books, believing all of it, and then turning it into something fun and kind of creative and original. I still do that part, but I'm reading from a wide variety of things, and I'm not just accepting everything as at face value and what the person said, because these people are saying a lot of different things. But I realized, oh, I still do that. I still glean all of this from people. It's like I'm curating knowledge, kind of. I'll pull the things that I think are good, and then I can put them in a form that someone who might not read 250 books a year like I do can
Yeah.
read my one book.
Yeah.
And then from there, and I always list all of the books so that if something does jump out at you, you can go read that
Yeah.
book. And that's my hope now, actually, instead of all conservative white evangelical Christians in my bibliography, I've got all kinds of
Right.
people.
Right. Well, so you are a writer. You are also a writer. There's all kinds of writers, but there's writers who read a lot too. And that's input in, and the writing is your input out.
Yeah.
And it can just be so crystallized, so well thought, so well rounded in a way too. So talk about that. You just said that 250 books a year. That's not normal, Marla.
No, it's
How does that happen?
it's not normal. It's because I've been reading since I was 4 years old, and I have loved it. I have always loved it. Like, loved it. And I would just devour books. As a kid, my favorite thing to do was go into my room by myself with my stack of books and read them. I would read, reread. I did write a lot when I was a kid too. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, both of my parents are avid readers. And actually my one of my grandmas she was an avid reader, like just
That's great.
obsessed. And she just loved books. She was a church librarian at our church. And so I guess it's just in my blood. Like that's
Yes.
just
Yes.
I can't help it. And I love it more now than I ever did. And I
Yes.
feel bad for people who are saying things like, I used to be able to read a lot, I can't now, or my attention span isn't great. I get a little bit of that, but that's why I have a stack of 12 books going at all
Yeah.
times. One fiction book, I like to read a story straight through, and then the rest are all nonfiction, things that I'm learning. And I can't go straight through a book either. So that's what I tell people if they're struggling to get through a 250, 300 page nonfiction book. Read 3 or 4 at a time, and then just look at the books each time you're sitting down to read. Which one
Yeah.
looks like fun right now? So
Yeah.
that's the way I do it.
Yeah. And I'll kind of skip ahead here a little bit. You've been specializing in reading BIPOC authors,
Yes.
people of color. You've been
Yes.
reading a lot of those books, and you have an Instagram account called White Girl Learning, where you where you actually review the books, you post about them. And I know that publishers, it's even gotten to a point now on your Instagram following where publishers are sending books to you to read because it helps them from a promotional point of view.
Yeah.
And you do this for free, I happen to know, which is very
Yeah.
gracious and amazing use of your time, although I know you enjoy it too, and you've learned so much. What got you started on that Instagram account? I think that's absolutely fascinating.
What got me started was the church plant that we joined in, I want to say 2009. Our pastor was a friend of ours, a Black man, wanted to plant a multi-ethnic church in our city, and we were on that team that helped start to do that. And when things started happening, so in 2012, when Trayvon Martin, the young Black boy, was killed in his neighborhood, that kind of woke me up, because I now had more Black friends in my life, but one of them had written on Facebook, "Why are none of my white friends talking about Trayvon Martin?" Well, I had no idea what she was talking about. So I Googled it and I see what happened. And then I realized that instead of an isolated incident that why does someone care about this? This is a pattern. This is something that I just dove deep, because now it was personal to me. I had friends of color over the course of my life, but in very small numbers. I'm from a very white small town in Ohio, a very white Christian university. I had done my student teaching in Japan, but that was different than coming back and living here in the US. And so fast forward to 2017, we were living in Cambodia at the time. And I had just been realizing over the course of 2016, 2017, that I had been reading so many books my whole life. And when I examined them, they were almost all by white authors. And I had people tell me, well, I don't pay attention to the authors, the skin color of the author. I just read good books. And I push back on that and say, if you're not paying attention and you're not being intentional, then you will read almost all white authors, because those are the ones being published. Those are the ones being promoted. That's what we're hearing about. You have to make a conscious effort to read books by Black authors, Indigenous authors, other authors of color. And they're out there, like behind me. All these shelves behind me are all books that I've read by BIPOC authors. So they are there, they've been there. We just don't know about them. So I had seen someone post a photo of a book and with some things she had put all around it, and said something, I think she was the one that said bookstagram. And I was like, wait a second, bookstagram, what is this? And I realized when I clicked out on different things, there were other people that were doing this. They're reading books, photographing them in these visually appealing ways, and writing about them. And I was like, well, crap, this is exactly what I would love to do. So on December 1st, 2017, so this week is 5 years from when I first started doing this.
Amazing.
Congratulations. I had already read some books, so I just photographed the book, in a tree, on a table, by a candle, whatever it was,
Yeah.
and wrote just a short little thing about it. And I mean, obviously I started out with 0 followers, and I wish I'd kept track of how much it grew and when. I didn't do that, and I honestly can't remember. But I was doing, I think, on Tuesday and Thursday, and then it quickly went to Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and then I think 3 years ago I started posting a book every single day, and I've done it every single day for like 1,000 days or something
Oh my gosh.
in a row. And it's not just I don't read 365 books, but I do read in between 200 and 300.
Yeah.
And then my 12-year-old niece, she does Mondays with Mia, so she reads books by
Yes.
BIPOC authors that are middle grade young adult books. Sometimes she'll help me out and do that on Friday too. I read picture books with my other nieces. And then on Sunday, I do a 6-stack of 6 books that have a theme. So it's not 365 books that I'm reading, but every day I'm posting. And yes, I do it for the love of books. I do it for the love of my neighbors of color, because when I think about loving your neighbor as yourself, what I personally want is for people to read my books. I want to write things and I want people to read them. And so that's my way of loving my neighbor, is I will read the words that you put in this book and I'm going to share them with people. So I have over 13,000 followers there now.
Yeah.
The algorithm of Instagram is kind of annoying.
I love that, by the way. It's your way of loving your neighbor. That is just amazing.
Yeah.
That's something that you've come to, it's crystallized for you over this time.
Oh,
that's why you do it. That's what motivates you to do it. And that's really something. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I've made so many friends. Like it is so friendships with the authors themselves, friendships with fellow book lovers. I've met up with people in real life. It sucks that I was in Cambodia from 2017 to 2020. And then when I got here, it was a pandemic. But in the last year or so, I've met up with some people and have big plans to meet up with more people. And what I was saying about the algorithm is that Instagram isn't really keen on showing a whole bunch of people a photo of a book. So I'll toss in some reels or do some things, but it's there if people want to find it. So a lot of times people will ask me for resources and I'll just go back through and I'll tag them in a bunch of posts that I've done before so they can see.
Yeah, good idea.
And I do have dreams of working on like resource lists and things that I can point people to, but I'm kind of busy reading and writing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's, to me, I could go on about this. This is really interesting what you're doing. But we're here to talk also about your book and you today. And I actually think there should be more about the white girl learning experience that you've had. We need to figure that out. But I suspect this also had a lot to do with your journey away from conservative evangelical Christianity. And, it just became part of that process for you.
Yeah.
When I read your writing, I can see that. I can see you're not just mentioning some of these other books, but the mindsets, the attitudes, the insights, the sensitivities are really there. And it's just, I feel like when I'm reading Marla Taviano, I'm like, okay, this is like a portal into other kinds of information. But it is about white evangelical Christianity very much so, because that's who you are. That's how you grew up. So you have gone through a faith deconstructing process over time, and you eventually wrote it all down in this book, Unbelieve: Poems on the Journey to Becoming a Heretic. So say what this book is about, but then also tell us where Jaded came from.
Okay, well, so in between all of those books that I held up earlier and the book that you held up, is a whole series of these ebooks that I was writing while I was in Cambodia. I did ebooks just because I was in a different country. I knew I couldn't get books to people, and I didn't know how to do it anyway. So I was always talking about my life, just because I'm not a fiction writer, not a novelist. And I wasn't someone that was an expert on anything really. So it was all about my life, as you saw, marriage, babies, pregnancy. And as my faith started to shift, and yes, the anti-racism was a huge part of that. Learning, I visited Cambodia in 2010 and seeing the poverty there and reading the book, The Hole in Our Gospel, about how telling people going to heaven when you die while you ignore their poverty here on earth is like, what are we doing? So all of these things were converging, and I was just so much cognitive dissonance. Things that I had believed forever were being called into question. I'm making friends who are gay, who are wonderful and beautiful, and yet I'm supposed to tell them to stop being gay because they're going to go to hell. Like, all of these things are just kind of crashing inside of me. And since this started happening around 2008, 2009, I have a head start on a lot of people who are just now in 2020 waking up to some things. So I was able to go slowly. And I say that to say that it was this luxury, but also realizing it was a luxury for me. And I thought I had plenty of time. Meanwhile, Black boys are still being shot down in the streets. Gay kids are still committing suicide. Like, all of these things are still happening. So me going slowly was just me going slowly. It was just because I was taking my sweet time, which is something I tell people now. Guess what? We don't have sweet time anymore, which is kind of why I wanted to write this book, to help other people maybe speed that process up, make some connections that took me a really long time to make. That if I could show people how I connected this to this and figured this out, and they could read it in one book instead of all of the things that I had to learn and go through. But as I was writing a book over a period of 5 or 6 years about this deconstruction, I don't think I even knew the word deconstruction at the beginning of that. It just kept changing so fast. I couldn't figure out how to tell the story, how to fit all this in. And it was really long. And honestly, I was bored. I was reading this stuff and thinking, well, I'm so far past that now. I don't care about that now. I don't want to write about that. I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to read that. And so that's when it turned into poems. So
you mean like another treatise on this or that?
Yeah,
kind of
just
like
blah 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 blah. Like, everybody has so many words, and I'm great. Like, I'm right now, I'm just going on and on and on. I could have said this in a couple words, and I'm using a whole bunch. But I without going into my whole big story of my failed marriage, I was making the money in my family for quite a long time, not by my choice. And so when we moved back to the States in 2020, and my ex-husband got a job finally, and I thought, okay, I can breathe. I can write this book now because we have money coming in, and I can finally just put it out in the world. Well, then he left and took his paycheck with him. So now I've got to support 5 people on my own. So I'm doing that, but I was determined, I will do this anyway. And that happened, and the boring happened. And I had been reading a lot of poetry, and somehow, and I want to just say magic. I would have said God in the past. We can say God if you want, but some magic thing happened. And I took all of that stuff I had written, and I chipped away and carved away, and I pulled poems out of it. And that's what it became. So it's over 300 pages, but some of the poems have like 12 words. Some are a whole page. There's a lot of quotes that I pulled out from other people. And yeah, and I realized the less I say, the more room there is for other people. That was kind of the theme of that. And I left literal white space that people can write in. I write in books. If it's a nonfiction book, I have a pen in my hand because I have to write my own thoughts. And I also have to remember what I read and what it triggered in me, and how I might use those thoughts in my own writing. So I left space for people. And that has been the single most fulfilling, exciting thing about writing this book, is the people that come to me and say, I saw myself in this poem. This is exactly how I feel. Or they'll extrapolate on it and add their own story. Or one of my favorites is when they're like, this was so brilliant. I love the way that you used this word and then said this and that. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I didn't know I did that. That
Yeah.
was not something that I meant to do. So people are bringing their own minds and experiences to the book and giving me more credit than I deserve, but I'll take it.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Well said. I mean, even
Mhm.
the short form of poetry, it's forcing you to say things with less words.
Yes.
And you're putting words together in new ways. And this is a
Mhm.
period where we need that kind of self-expression. We
Mhm.
need new expressions. We need
Mhm.
new ways of putting words together, new ways of saying things.
Yeah.
Um, and if you were trying to write a sort of logical narrative, 3,000 word chapter, it
Yeah.
might not come out like it needs to right now. And I
Yeah.
think there's something pretty brilliant about it. And I love the idea of giving people space within
Yeah.
the reading experience, even if it means writing a little bit themselves.
And there, it is a very real thing that people do not have an attention span. They want things quick and easy. People cannot read a whole book. My favorite, I keep saying my favorite, these are all my favorite. Just this morning, I woke up to a text from my 20-year-old niece who was here over the Thanksgiving holiday. We got to talking really late. She is a night owl. I was exhausted. It was like 12:30. And we're talking about all these things and realizing how much our views are similar. And she knew me as Aunt Marla, the former Aunt Marla, who was a very conservative Christian. So she's like almost shocked to hear that I have all these different views now. So
Yeah.
everything she's saying, I'm like, oh, I have a poem about that. I have a poem about that. So I pull out my book, I sign it to her, and I'm like, here, read this. Well, I didn't know if she would read it or not. I woke up at 6:30 this morning to a text from her. I accidentally read your whole book in an hour last night.
Yeah.
And
Accidentally.
she
Yeah.
told me her 3 favorite poems and why she loved them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's my
Yeah.
favorite. And so that was the point. You can accidentally read this book
Yeah.
in an hour, 2 hours, depending on how quick
It,
of a reader
it
you
is
are.
it is kind of a fun benefit because, hey,
Yeah.
read this book. You can do it. It only takes an hour or 2 hours
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
And
think,
I would rather
yeah, it's
people
fun.
want more at the end of reading my book than I don't think I can make it through your long, boring book.
Yeah.
I don't want to be boring. That's like one
Yeah.
of my worst fears. I don't want to be bored and I don't want to be boring.
Yeah.
So
Well, I
that
also
was kind
think
of my goal.
it's a book for others who they can just pick it up and read a little bit at a time and just sort
Mhm.
of soak it in too and absorb it. But reading it cover to cover in one sitting is fine too. It
I
depends.
got an I got an email yesterday. I have someone who's reading an early copy of Jaded, and she said, I finished Jaded. I loved it. It was my morning quiet time this morning, and she put a smiley face because it was
Yep.
Sunday morning.
Yep.
So there's a
Yep.
lot of people using it as a quote unquote devotional, which
Yep.
is ironic and fun for me.
So Jaded was, I mean, Unbelieve was about your journey on becoming a heretic, and it's not so much your
Mhm.
story as it is just all these thoughts expressed
Yeah.
in the form of short poetry. Um, but then you say that you thought you would move on in your deconstructing journey. You thought you'd move on to like more positive spirituality, just
Mhm.
more, just moving on into the world with bigger thoughts, putting all this
Mhm.
behind you, but you've not been
Ha
able to put it
ha.
behind you.
No, I have not. Again, it was kind of the boredom thing. Like, I'm so bored with all this deconstruction discourse. Let's just move on. And I'm realizing why we can't move on, just because there's just so much there and it
Right.
keeps happening. And I do feel the pull to help people who want to get out. So I've had a lot of my Black friends and some other people use the phrase get your people, like gather your people. And what they're meaning by that is specifically in the context of racism, white people, go get your racist white friends, your racist white uncle, and you go work on them. Don't expect us to do that work. These are your people. I would prefer to be like, and just push all those people aside and separate myself from them. I can't. I am them. Yes, I have learned things. Yes, I have woken up to some things. But these are, for better or for worse, my people. So, and I do still love them and I do care. And I know that there are some people, it's not worth my time and effort, not because they are not a valuable human being, but I would have to spend every minute of every day arguing with this one person who is determined that they will not budge from where they are, no matter what anyone says to them ever, even if it's the most convincing, compelling argument. So I don't worry about them. It's the people who come to me with sincere questions, who are curious, who might be open to some things. Those are the people that I am going after. So Jaded, yeah, it was just,
What's the subtitle, Jaded, again?
Poetic
Reckoning with...
A Poetic Reckoning with White Christian Evangelical Indoctrination. It's a mouthful, but I wanted all those words in there because they all they were all important to the whole equation. And I just realized it's kind of like when white people today say, listen, slavery was in the past, this is in the past, let's just move on. Well, you don't get to just move on. It's like if someone abuses you for 30 years and then you are like, you know what, let's just move on. You don't move on, you've got to heal.
Right.
Resmaa Menakem is an author who talks about clean pain and dirty pain, where clean pain is, you got to work through all of that before you can heal. You can't just ignore it. You can't shove it under the rug. Especially if you are the perpetrator, you're the abuser, you're the racist. We've got to deal with all of that. So I knew I had to dig deeper into my own crap and into other stuff. And I had avoided some topics in the first one. I did not talk about abortion or the pro-life movement. That was the last domino to fall for me because I love babies.
Yeah.
So it's just, that was the final thing for me, but then just opening my eyes to things there. I have a section in Jaded called Disability Justice. That was just me having no idea. I'm not disabled. No one in my immediate family is disabled, and not realizing how people are affected by us not noticing or realizing or yeah, so there's a section on there. There's a section on biblical womanhood, indoctrination, white supremacy, patriarchy,
purity culture,
which I had a part in.
That's biblical.
Like I read something in my first book where I'm like, women, you need to make sure you cover up and you're modest, and for your husband, and blah 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 blah, like all the stuff.
It's all I need.
Yeah, exactly. So it's an exhaustive book with all my thoughts and everything everybody needs to know. No. And there's the freedom in that. And it's kind of a metaphor for how I feel now, where I don't have to give an answer for every single thing about being a Christian. Like, that was my whole life. How can I make sure that I have this airtight defense? How can I make sure no one can crumble my armor? Like, no one can get in. And now I don't need to do that anymore. So I don't need to have it all in the book, and I don't claim to. And I put the word heretic on the front of the first one, so people can come to me and call me that, and it doesn't matter to me. And I just found out, like, last month, that the word heretic comes from the Greek word heresis, which means choice. It doesn't mean bad person, evil person, lost person, confused. It means choice. Like, I chose this.
Right.
And we didn't have a choice. I didn't have a choice growing up. I mean, technically I did. I didn't think I did. I thought, here's the right thing. My only job is to figure out how to keep believing it, never stray from it, and help other people believe it too. So I did it all in good faith with a good heart. I had the truth, and I wanted everybody else to have it.
Yes.
Which is how I feel now. It's just a different, it's a different kind of truth.
I think I really do encourage anyone watching this to go check out Jaded. This is a process that we're in. This is not something that happens overnight. Dealing with your pain is a painstakingly slow process.
Yeah.
And acknowledging the things around you. I don't think I think it's going to take so much time for us to come to grips with the fact that evangelical Christianity has been this construction, a social construction more than a theology,
Yeah.
a
Oh,
social
true.
construction that has created theology. Let's just talk about purity culture. There's that in itself could be code of for like women as pure and perhaps white. That can be
Mm-hmm.
code for saying we're not
Mm-hmm.
going to connect with things that are impure, you
Yeah.
know, or even the big debate about sexuality and queerness. Why are evangelicals so hung up on that? They didn't used to be so hung up on it, but now it's coming out because they're being challenged, and it's threatening. I won't
Yeah.
get into all that stuff, but I do think that I think it's fascinating that, you know, your journey here and the fact that you're writing poetry about it in Unbelief and now in Jaded, and then you're even thinking of another book after
Mm-hmm.
this. You feel like you're not done yet getting all this out. And I think that's part of why this is so important, why people should check out your writing. What is that third book idea that you're thinking of?
Well, it's tentatively titled More. I got a couple other ideas. I'm not going to say them right now, but just the idea of moving past that there's so much more out there
Yes. And that's what
that
we're
we
all
were
hoping for.
afraid of
Mm-hmm.
before, and all of similar to reading books by Black women, and they opened up this whole new world for me. It was like when I went snorkeling in Okinawa in 1997 for the first time and saw this entire world under the water. It is literally a whole world of brilliant colors and brilliant formations and architecture and like all of this stuff. And you think to yourself, this was under here the whole time,
Mm.
and the earth is like 75% water, and I
Yes.
live in this little town in this little country, and you realize just how tiny
Yes.
it is, the thing is. And so that's what I'm discovering about white evangelical Christianity, is how tiny it is, and how we somehow thought that our tiny little idea is the only truth in the whole entire world, which is so cocky and arrogant
Right.
of us. And
Why
when
are
you
we like
hear
that?
people
Yeah.
regurgitating the same things over and over, like when I would celebrate gay friends or wish happy Eid or Ramadan to my Muslim friends, and Christians would come at me with these, they would use the same phrases, the same lines, and it's like, are they all reading the same like little, well they are, and it's not the Bible. It's like
Yeah.
the script that we're
Yeah.
given. It's so small. So this third book, I want it to just be expansive and exciting. And instead of shaming people, which I've done my fair share of, shaming people into anti-racism or shaming them into being LGBTQ plus affirming, just showing them how amazing and beautiful and exciting it is. It's kind of what I do with
Yeah.
White Girl Learning. There's no shaming there. It's like, do you want to come see something really awesome? Because here
Yeah.
it is. And then
Yeah.
people come.
Yeah.
And so that's what I want to do in that book. Now, is that the end? No. Does my deconstruction story wrap up in a neat little trilogy? No. But I do
Right.
want to put the ending on that, and that would be the one, like
Yeah.
that kind of trilogy. Do I have like 12 other book ideas? Yes. So this has been going
Yeah.
on for a long, long time. And I keep thinking of these new analogies for it. There's a game called Ticket to Ride. I don't know if you've heard of that game,
Mm.
where you're collecting these cards and then you're building these trains and you're going through Europe or whatever. It's a really fun game. But each turn you have an option. You can pick more cards, you can play your trains, or you can do these other things, and you have to be kind of strategic about it. My friend Pam is notorious for collecting like 50 cards in her hand, and everybody else is doing all this stuff and she's just collecting cards, collecting cards. Well, then when she's ready, she's like boom 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 boom, and she wins because she already had like all of that stuff. And that's kind of what I've been doing the last,
Yeah.
I don't know, 20 years. I'm
Yes.
just collecting, 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 collecting through reading, through learning, through
Yes.
watching, and it's gonna explode. It's just a matter of finding the time
Yes.
to get all that out. Since I already mentioned that I can't support myself yet with the books that I have not written.
Yes.
So, but get ready because it's
Yeah.
it's gonna be
Well, let's
it's gonna be fun.
well, I'm glad. Thank you for trusting Lake Drive Books and
Yeah.
working together on this next one called Jaded. And I'm really struck by your vision of wanting to help your people. And I think it's broader than that, but that is so, especially for Jaded, I think that's so,
Yeah.
that's so key. And it's not so much about convincing people, although people can be convinced by reading a book.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's so many of us that are just wondering, and we're looking for answers, and we're trying to see light on a path. And you've done some of that work, especially with all that great reading that you've done.
Yeah.
And it's just created a certain awareness that I think, you know, getting this down in these poems is just so super helpful. So thank you. And how can people find you? Last question.
I would have said Twitter until boo,
Yeah.
Elon Musk taking over and all my friends are leaving. I'm Marla Taviano on Twitter. I'm still hanging out there for now. Marla Taviano on Instagram, and then my other Instagram account is White Girl Learning, and then my website is marlataviano.com.
Okay.
So
great. Well, I hope people
just my name, basically, all the places.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, please check out Marla, everybody. Support Marla's writing.
Yeah.
And make some goodness happen. That's what's gonna come. Such a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much, Marla.
Thank you, David. I really appreciate it.